Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Carl Jung. Have you ever found yourself silently yearning to embody a state of being utterly unshakable, to become someone seemingly impervious to the stinging barbs of criticism, the pangs of rejection, the desolate ache of loss, or the sharp, soul-crushing betrayal? Have you ever drifted off into daydreams, envisioning a future day when you will finally cease to feel that persistent, silent pain, that underlying anguish that subtly corrodes you from the inside out? Even as you meticulously maintain a facade of being perfectly fine, strong, and composed on the outside, perhaps you've grown weary, bone-deep tired of the exhausting, endless effort required to please everyone, to constantly uphold an image of strength and resilience that demands perpetual vigilance, when in reality all you truly crave is a moment's rest, a brief respite from the relentless pressure of needing to appear perpetually untouchable. But allow me to share something with you now, a truth perhaps rarely spoken with such directness, something that few possess the courage to fully acknowledge. As long as your primary strategy is to desperately avoid pain, that very pain will continue, paradoxically, to control you. As long as you strive to numb yourself to difficult emotions, to defensively protect yourself behind walls of indifference, to strategically hide your vulnerabilities, you will inevitably remain a psychological hostage to everything that unfolds around you. You will remain susceptible to the careless words that inflict deep wounds, tethered to the disappointing actions of others that shatter your expectations, haunted by the chilling silences that feel like a slow death inside. And understand this clearly: this state of vulnerability is not an inherent sign of weakness. It is simply the reality for most people. The crucial difference lies in the fact that some individuals become far more adept at pretending, at maintaining the illusion of invulnerability than others. Carl Jung, one of the towering figures in the field of depth psychology, offered a profound insight. We are not merely the passive products of what happens to us, but rather we are defined by what we consciously choose to become in response to those experiences. And nestled within that powerful statement lies the essential key to liberation. The path to true emotional resilience is not about building impenetrable shields against the world. It is not about cultivating a state of cold indifference or striving for an ultimately unattainable state of being utterly untouchable. It is rather about the challenging yet profoundly rewarding process of integration. It's about courageously bringing into the light of conscious awareness everything that currently affects you from the hidden depths of the dark, the unconscious realms of your psyche. Because authentic, enduring strength is not characterized by the absence of pain, but rather by the full conscious awareness of who you truly are in all your complexity. Even, perhaps especially, when you are metaphorically bleeding from life's inevitable wounds. If you have journeyed this far into this exploration, understand that it is likely not by chance. This message is specifically intended for you, the individual who feels weary, exhausted from constantly hurting yourself with the perceived slights and actions of everything and everyone around you. It's for you who consistently feel that you are operating at an emotional disadvantage, as if other people somehow possess a mysterious power over your inner state, a power you struggle to comprehend or counteract. I want to illuminate a path forward, to show you that it doesn't have to be this way. But be prepared. Achieving this transformation will require you to confront some difficult, potentially painful truths about yourself and the nature of your suffering. And perhaps, just perhaps, for the very first time, confronting this internal pain rather than avoiding it will be the very act that ultimately sets you free. Let us begin this crucial exploration together. You likely operate under the deeply ingrained belief that the source of your pain resides primarily out there in the external world, located within the careless actions of others, embedded in poorly chosen words that sting, rooted in the abandonments you have endured, stemming from the betrayals you never anticipated. But the truth, when faced with unflinching honesty, is often far more brutal and harder to accept. None of these external events truly possess the inherent power to hurt you, unless there is already a corresponding pre-existing open wound inside you waiting to be triggered. What genuinely hurts you is not primarily what others do to you. It is far more accurately what these external experiences activate within you. It is the story you unconsciously tell yourself about the event, the meaning you assign to it based on past experiences. It is the old trauma, perhaps from childhood or previous relationships, that has never been fully acknowledged, processed, and healed. It is the underlying emptiness, the feeling of inadequacy or unlovability that you desperately try to disguise with a facade of strength, pride, or that relentless, exhausting need to seem perfectly well-adjusted and unfazed. Jung's profound insights reveal that the emotional pain we experience in response to the external world is often merely a reflection, a projection of what remains unintegrated, unresolved, and unhealed within our own internal world. This explains why some individuals can navigate seemingly devastating situations, loss, failure, criticism, and still maintain a remarkable degree of inner clarity and resilience, while others crumble completely in the face of a seemingly simple offhand comment. It is not fundamentally about the objective nature of what happens. It is about where within your own psychological landscape that external event hits you. And here emerges an uncomfortable yet crucial truth. You likely still suffer so intensely, so frequently, because on some deep, perhaps unconscious level, you still cling to the illusion that you can somehow control how the world should treat you. You are perpetually striving, consciously or unconsciously, to be good enough, smart enough, strong enough, understanding enough, operating under the implicit, often desperate hope that if you just achieve the right combination of qualities, you will somehow guarantee that no one will ever hurt you again. But control over the external world, particularly over the actions and perceptions of others, is ultimately an illusion. And as long as you desperately cling to this illusion, you condemn yourself to live in a state of constant tension, perpetually trying to predict the inherently unpredictable, striving relentlessly to avoid the unavoidable pains and disappointments that are an inherent part of the human experience. Do you genuinely want to stop suffering, or at least significantly diminish its power over you? Then paradoxically, you must stop trying so desperately to protect yourself from suffering. What you fundamentally need is not more external control, but infinitely more internal awareness. As long as you operate under the belief that other people need to change their behavior in order for you to stop feeling pain, you will remain perpetually enslaved by their actions, their words, their choices. Your true freedom begins the very moment you deeply understand and internalize the truth that everything originating from the outside, criticism, rejection, praise, betrayal, only possesses the power to significantly affect you if it finds a corresponding echo, a resonant frequency, an unhealed wound within you. And this internal landscape, this realm of echoes and wounds, is precisely where the true battlefield lies, not out there in the world, but within the vast, often unexplored territory of your own unconscious. As Jung powerfully stated, what you do not consciously see, do not understand, and do not actively work to master within yourself inevitably masters you from the shadows. And it is this hidden, potent realm of the unconscious that we must now explore in the next crucial part of our journey. Prepare yourself to dive one level deeper, to confront the hidden forces shaping your reality, because it is precisely there in the depths of the unconscious that true lasting transformation actually begins. The biggest, most pervasive lie you've likely been told, and perhaps unknowingly tell yourself every day, is that you are fundamentally in control of your life, your emotions, your destiny. It's time to wake up, because you are not truly, at least not as long as you continue living largely on autopilot, reacting impulsively without understanding the deeper source of your reactions, feeling intense emotions without comprehending where they truly originate, making significant life decisions that you later find yourself inexplicably sabotaging. Carl Jung articulated this profound truth with startling clarity when he famously stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that, in essence, is precisely what is likely happening to you right now, influencing your experiences far more than you realize. The persistent pain you feel after certain interactions, the sudden surges of anger that seem to explode out of nowhere, the waves of sadness that inexplicably invade you even when things seem objectively fine. None of this is random. These are not mere glitches in your emotional system. They are crucial messages, signals emanating from parts of yourself that have been long forgotten, persistently ignored, actively repressed into the shadows of your awareness. Jung referred to this vast, hidden, and often turbulent inner territory as the unconscious. And it is crucial to understand that the unconscious is not simply a passive repository, a dusty attic filled with vague thoughts or forgotten memories. It is an incredibly active force, an entire dynamic system teeming with repressed memories, unhealed trauma, powerful instinctual desires, deep-seated fears, and undeveloped potentials. Aspects of yourself that your conscious ego, for various reasons, often related to fear or societal conditioning, does not want to face directly. But these hidden elements continue relentlessly to decide much of what you feel and how you ultimately act in the world, operating just beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. You find yourself wondering, perhaps in frustration, why certain words, certain types of criticism absolutely destroy you emotionally, leaving you reeling for days while other people seem utterly unfazed by similar comments. The reason is starkly simple. Those specific words touch sensitive, unresolved points within your unique unconscious points that are still psychologically alive and bleeding. And if these points remain alive and reactive, it is almost certainly because you have never truly confronted them directly, never brought them into the light of conscious understanding and integration. You have likely only pushed them further down, attempting to bury them under the psychological rug of denial, repression, or distraction, and now, predictably, you keep tripping over them again and again in your daily life, manifesting as recurring patterns of pain and self-sabotage. Jung offered another piece of profound wisdom. We cannot change anything until we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. And what have you likely been doing consciously or unconsciously for much of your life? Judging yourself harshly for your perceived flaws and vulnerabilities, actively repressing uncomfortable emotions or unacceptable desires, persistently silencing the parts of yourself that don't fit the idealized image you strive to project, all under the misguided assumption that suppression and denial will somehow make these unwanted aspects disappear, that they will solve the underlying problem. But the truth, as Jung repeatedly emphasized, is that the unconscious does not simply vanish just because your conscious mind chooses to ignore it, denied expression. It only finds more insidious, often more dangerous ways to manifest itself in your external life, perhaps through repeating patterns of toxic relationships that mirror old wounds, through persistent cycles of self-sabotage that derail your best intentions, or through pervasive anxieties and irrational fears that mysteriously arise precisely when everything on the surface seems to be going well. This is not simply bad luck or inexplicable fate. It is your own unconscious desperately trying to wake you up, to force you to pay attention to what remains unhealed and unintegrated within. But often you insist on remaining asleep, clinging to the familiar illusions of control and conscious awareness. Do you genuinely desire to become someone who is no longer perpetually hurt by the inevitable slings and arrows of life? Then you must fundamentally stop running away from what resides inside you, because as long as you remain fundamentally unaware of your own unconscious dynamics, your hidden fears, your unresolved traumas, your projected shadows, you will inevitably remain a puppet of your own volatile emotions tossed about by forces you neither understand nor control. And paradoxically, the more desperately you try to protect yourself from external pain, criticism, rejection, the more profoundly vulnerable you become to the far more insidious internal pain generated by your own unacknowledged complexes and repressed material. But crucially, there is a way out of this cycle. And that way lies not in building thicker defensive walls, not in striving for numb indifference. It lies in the courageous, often arduous process of integrating these hidden parts of yourself into a larger, more conscious whole. Because becoming truly untouchable, in the psychologically meaningful sense, is not primarily an act of resistance against the external world. It is fundamentally an act of profound self-knowledge and acceptance. This transformative process of integration is what we will delve into next. What does it truly mean psychologically to be someone who is genuinely unshaken from within? And why does this profound strength arise not from constructing impenetrable armor, but paradoxically from the courageous act of radical acceptance? Let us continue this vital journey inward. The prevailing belief deeply ingrained in our culture is that the only effective way to avoid getting hurt emotionally is by closing ourselves off. People meticulously construct psychological walls, craft elaborate social masks, develop rigid emotional armor, and often desperately pretend that nothing truly affects them. They utter the familiar refrains, "I don't care anymore. I couldn't care less. Nothing gets to me." But beneath this carefully maintained facade of indifference often lies a hidden truth inside. They continue to bleed. They continue to be silently corroded by suppressed emotions, unresolved wounds, and the gnawing emptiness that comes from living inauthentically. Because the fundamental problem was never about feeling the pain. The problem arises from not consciously knowing what you are truly feeling, and more importantly, why you are feeling it. And this lack of self-awareness, this disconnection from one's own inner landscape, only happens to those who do not yet truly know themselves on a deeper level. Jung, with his characteristic psychological precision, offered a profound piece of advice that speaks directly to this: know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as touching a human soul, be just another human soul. And that vulnerable, complex human soul, your soul, which you may be desperately insisting on hiding behind a carefully constructed character of the strong, the invulnerable, the perfectly controlled individual, is silently screaming to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated, not suppressed. Becoming genuinely emotionally strong has absolutely nothing to do with becoming cold or detached. It has nothing to do with habitually ignoring pain, strategically avoiding conflict at all costs, or pretending not to care when you deeply do. True psychological strength has everything to do with the courageous process of integrating, of consciously accepting, of patiently bringing into the light of awareness everything you have previously buried in the shadows of your unconscious. Your fears, your insecurities, your perceived flaws, your unacceptable desires. You do not become truly untouchable by erecting an impenetrable barrier between yourself and the world. You become psychologically untouchable, paradoxically, when you reach a point of such profound self-acceptance and integration that you realize no external event or person can fundamentally touch or destroy that which has already been consciously embraced and integrated within you. When you actively engage in the process of integrating your shadows, those disowned parts of yourself, acknowledging your deepest fears without being paralyzed by them, accepting your inevitable flaws with compassion and understanding, the roots of your insecurities, a profound shift occurs. You stop reacting automatically and defensively to everything that triggers those aspects. Instead, you learn to observe your internal responses with detachment. You consciously choose how to respond, rather than being driven by unconscious compulsion. You cease to be an emotional puppet jerked around by external strings. And that ultimately is the very definition of true psychological freedom. Jung termed this lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness, individuation. It is the intricate, often challenging process of becoming who you really are authentically and completely, not merely what others expect of you, not the idealized image you mistakenly thought you should be in order to be accepted or loved, but the unique, complex individual that organically emerges from within, born from the conscious, courageous meeting of light and shadow, from the dynamic interplay between the conscious ego and the vast, potent depths of the unconscious. Crucially, individuation is not a process aimed at achieving some unattainable state of perfection, as Jung himself emphasized. It is rather a process of integration. You do not need to somehow magically transform yourself into a better, flawless person. According to some external standard, you simply need to strive towards becoming whole, acknowledging and integrating all aspects of your multifaceted being, both the light and the dark. And here lies the profound secret, the paradox often missed by those solely focused on avoiding pain. The more desperately you run from pain, the more relentlessly it seems to chase you. The more intensely you try not to be affected by life's difficulties, the more psychologically fragile you often become. But conversely, when you summon the courage to turn around and directly face your own wounds, when you practice radical acceptance of who you are right now with all that is beautiful and ugly, noble and shameful within you, then, remarkably, nothing originating from the outside possesses the ultimate power to dismantle you. However, embarking upon and sustaining this path of integration requires immense courage. The courage to unflinchingly look within even at the parts you'd rather ignore. The courage to progressively abandon the masks and defenses that have provided a false sense of security. And perhaps most fundamentally, the courage to simply feel fully and without judgment the often uncomfortable emotions that arise during this process, because it is precisely within the experience of pain, when consciously met and understood, that the hidden key to transformation often lies concealed. And that transformative potential inherent in suffering is precisely what we will explore in the next vital section. How suffering, far from being merely an enemy to be vanquished, can paradoxically become the very gateway to unlocking your true resilient strength. Let's dive even deeper, and this time let us endeavor to do so without fear. You learned likely from a very young age, perhaps even implicitly, to hate pain. You were subtly or overtly taught that experiencing and expressing suffering is somehow a sign of inherent weakness, that crying is an unproductive waste of time, a display of vulnerability to be suppressed, that feeling emotions too much, too intensely, makes you dangerously vulnerable to manipulation or further hurt. And so, driven by this ingrained conditioning, you began to run, to actively avoid situations or feelings that might cause discomfort, to engage in various forms of denial when pain inevitably arose. But the profound paradox, the one Jung sought to illuminate, is this. The more desperately you flee from suffering, the more relentlessly it seems to chase you. And worse still, ignored or suppressed pain doesn't simply vanish. It merely changes form. It cunningly disguises itself, manifesting as chronic anxiety, simmering anger, pervasive apathy, persistent boredom, or even baffling self-destructive impulses whose origins you struggle to comprehend. Ignored pain doesn't disappear. It just digs insidious tunnels deep inside your psyche, undermining your well-being from within, until one day, often without warning, everything feels like it's collapsing. Jung viewed suffering through a radically different, far more constructive lens. He believed that psychological pain was not an enemy to be eradicated, but rather a vital messenger of the soul, the crucial alarm system of the unconscious, the very language that the self, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, uses to desperately try and get your conscious attention. He offered a powerful metaphor. Depression is like a lady in black. If she appears, don't shoo her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, treat her like a guest, and listen to what she wants to say. But typically, you don't listen. You instinctively silence the messenger. You desperately distract yourself with endless activity or external stimulation. You keep yourself perpetually busy, avoiding quiet moments of introspection. You numb yourself through various means: substances, excessive work, superficial entertainment. You engage in almost anything and everything to avoid looking squarely at what truly matters. What is this specific pain trying to show me? What imbalance is it signaling? What aspect of myself am I neglecting or denying? The fundamental truth is that suffering often hurts so intensely precisely because you are still engaged in a state of internal war with yourself. There remains a part of you yearning for growth, evolution, and authentic expression, while simultaneously another deeply ingrained part desperately clings to the familiar, wanting to keep everything safely, predictably as it is. There is something vital inside you that cries out for profound transformation, but your conscious ego, long accustomed to being in control and terrified of the unknown, instinctively tries to suffocate that call, to maintain the status quo at all costs. And it is precisely within this internal friction, this clash between the forces of stagnation and the impulse towards growth, that much of our psychological pain is born. Because change hurts, growth hurts, letting go of cherished but outdated beliefs hurts, cutting ties with toxic, albeit familiar relationships hurts, allowing the parts of your life or identity that no longer serve you to metaphorically die. All of this constitutes a form of mourning, an internal process involving both death and the potential for rebirth. But crucially, it is precisely within this often painful space of ruin, this psychological deconstruction, that something genuinely new can finally be born. Because when everything you thought defined you begins to be deconstructed, when your old certainties crumble into dust, when the raw pain strips away your carefully constructed defenses and lays bare your fundamental vulnerability, only then can you finally begin to see who you really are, without the distorting layers of protection, without the exhausting performance, without the suffocating mask. And at that exact point of raw, vulnerable self-awareness, suffering can become almost sacred, because it has the power to bring you to your knees, humbling your ego before the only force that can truly set you free: yourself, your own deeper, wiser, authentic self. Jung knew this profound truth intimately. He understood that suffering is not a fundamental failure of the existential system. It is an integral, often necessary part of the process of becoming whole. Pain is not the end of the road. It is often the very beginning of the journey towards psychological integration and genuine individuation. The profound problem, however, is that most people give up before they have fully crossed that challenging, often dark valley of suffering. They flee back towards distraction. They distract themselves with superficial pursuits. They hastily retreat back to the perceived safety of the surface, refusing to engage with the depths. But not you. If you have journeyed this far absorbing these challenging ideas, it signifies that a part of you is inherently ready to cross. And in the next crucial section, we will seek to understand precisely how this transformative crossing process typically unfolds. How the path of individuation, no matter how lonely and brutal it may sometimes seem, is ultimately the very path that finally sets you free. Let's continue. It's getting deeper now. Precious few individuals possess the initial courage to even begin the demanding journey of individuation, and even fewer possess the unwavering tenacity and inner fortitude required to complete it, or rather to commit to it as a lifelong process. Why? Because this path, the path towards authentic selfhood, offers no promises of easy comfort. It provides no external guarantees of success or happiness. And crucially, it does not seek to protect or inflate your conscious ego. In many ways, it systematically works to destroy its illusions and dismantle its defenses. Jung referred to individuation as the complex, often lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, but this profound undertaking means, above all else, courageously unlearning much of what you think. You are peeling away the layers of conditioning and false identification. And that process, the shedding of illusions about oneself, often hurts far more intensely than any external rejection or criticism ever could, because you begin the often unsettling process of realizing that much of what previously defined you, much of what you built your identity upon, was ultimately an illusion, a construct. You are not simply your external achievements or failures. You are not solely defined by your past traumas or wounds. You are not merely the carefully crafted image you constructed in order to be loved, respected, or admired by others. All of these were, in essence, adaptive strategies, masks you created primarily to survive within your specific environment and social context. But surviving is not the same as truly living, and individuation represents life's insistent call to move beyond mere survival, to embrace the fullness of authentic existence. It often commences when the unconscious begins to actively push everything that has been long repressed, hidden, distorted, or denied up towards the surface of conscious awareness, demanding attention and integration. Individuation requires the dissolution of the persona. Jung wrote pointedly, for it is merely a mask of collective convenience. In other words, to discover the authentic self that lies beneath you will inevitably need to engage in the often painful process of metaphorically tearing off your own familiar skin, the comfortable persona you have presented to the world. It is precisely through this challenging, often tumultuous process of confronting and integrating the previously unconscious material that you begin to become genuinely untouchable. Not in the sense that nothing affects you anymore, but in the far more profound sense that you have already gone through the inner fire. You have consciously faced your internal monsters, the archetypal shadows that lurk within. You have looked directly into the eyes of your own shame, your own deep-seated neediness, your own repressed anger, and have reached a point where you can say with quiet conviction, "I see you, I acknowledge you, and you no longer unconsciously control me." It is this hard-won internal clarity, this unwavering lucidity developed in the face of your own darkness, that bestows upon you a kind of inner strength that is utterly independent of external approval, societal recognition, or the illusion of control over external events. You no longer feel the desperate need to be loved or liked by everyone. You no longer feel compelled to win every argument or prove your point. You no longer need to constantly project an image of strength, because you possess a deep, quiet knowing of who you are at your core, and that fundamental self-knowledge, that integrated sense of self, is something no one can ever take away from you. True emotional armor, therefore, is not a rigid, impenetrable outer shell designed to keep the world out. It is rather a strong, flexible inner core. It is the result of consciously integrating all your disparate parts, the light and the shadow, the strengths and the weaknesses, into a cohesive center of consciousness that remains fundamentally unshaken. Even amidst life's inevitable storms, you may still feel pain acutely perhaps, but it does not break you. You may still experience being hurt by others' actions, but you do not lose yourself entirely in the emotional aftermath. Why? Because you have consciously transitioned from being primarily reactive, driven by unconscious triggers, to becoming fundamentally whole, integrated, and self-aware. You have stopped living solely on the superficial surface of life and have begun to courageously inhabit your own authentic depths. However, this profound depth inevitably comes at a price. Loneliness, not necessarily the loneliness of physical isolation, but the often more challenging loneliness of psychological and spiritual differentiation. You will likely feel lonely at times, precisely because few people can truly accompany you on this deep inward journey. Most individuals remain consciously or unconsciously trapped on the surface, preoccupied with masked social games and the pervasive fear of genuinely feeling their own deeper emotions. And as you begin to courageously free yourself from these superficial entanglements, you will inevitably naturally distance yourself from those who remain bound by them. But understand this crucial distinction. This distancing is not fundamentally an act of rejection or born out of arrogance or pride. It is rather a natural consequence of psychological maturation. You do not distance yourself because you feel superior. You distance yourself simply because you no longer fit comfortably where you once hid in the confining spaces of conformity and superficiality. And this brings us to the final culminating point of this entire transformative journey, consciousness itself as the ultimate shield. Because ultimately it is not brute strength, emotional hardness, or defensive walls that truly protect you. It is clarity, it is awareness. This is what we will discuss in the very last part. Consciousness as the only state in which nothing, absolutely nothing external, holds ultimate power over your inner being. Let's finish this crossing together. We are almost there. Now that you have journeyed this far, immersing yourself in these challenging yet potentially liberating ideas, there is something that needs to be stated with absolute unwavering clarity. Nothing, absolutely nothing, will effectively shield you from external suffering if you remain fundamentally unconscious of what is happening within you. The careless words of others will continue to inflict deep wounds. The inevitable rejections of life will continue to sting with painful intensity. The unavoidable losses will keep bringing you down, threatening to shatter your equilibrium until you consciously choose to awaken. And awakening in this profound psychological sense is not some mystical, instantaneous event. It is a daily choice, a moment-by-moment commitment. It is the courageous act of consistently looking within, even and especially when it hurts. It is the radical act of taking full responsibility for everything you feel without resorting to blaming others, blaming your past circumstances, or blaming the nebulous concept of fate anymore. Carl Jung powerfully stated, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." Reflect honestly. You have likely spent your entire life consciously or unconsciously resisting. Resisting the gnawing fear of not being enough. Resisting the hollow emptiness left by rejection. Resisting the sharp pain of loneliness. Resisting the deep anguish of not feeling truly seen or understood. But what practical actions did you take in response to that resistance? You likely hid your true feelings behind masks. You silenced your authentic voice to avoid conflict. You desperately tried to control everything and everyone around you. You strove relentlessly to be perfect. You put immense pressure on yourself to always appear strong. And all of this exhausting effort, all this resistance has ultimately brought you here. Likely feeling exhausted, weary, tired of perpetually fighting against both the external world and more profoundly against yourself. But now, hopefully, you know better. You understand that true emotional immunity, genuine resilience, is not hardness. It is clarity. It is not about constructing thicker, more impenetrable armor. It is about consciously expanding your awareness. Because when you truly begin to understand your own internal landscape, your triggers, your ingrained patterns, your unhealed wounds, the actions and words of others gradually lose their power to destroy you. You may still feel pain. That is part of being human, but you no longer drown in it. You may still suffer setbacks and disappointments, but you no longer lose yourself completely in the emotional aftermath. And that fundamental shift changes everything. What truly shields you, what offers genuine protection, is not desperately trying to protect yourself from life, from its inevitable challenges and pains. It is paradoxically learning how to courageously dive into it deeply with awareness and acceptance. Those who perpetually live on the shallow surface of existence are easily hurt, tossed about by every passing wave of circumstance. Those who learn to dive deep into the quiet depths of their own being Discover that beneath the turbulent surface there exists a profound realm of silence, unwavering stability, and immense inner power. And that depth is where your true journey is ultimately headed. And when you begin to consistently live from that integrated place of inner presence, conscious awareness, and radical self-acceptance, the external world may still attempt to knock you down, circumstances may still challenge you, people may still disappoint you, but it will no longer find the same vulnerable points, the same unhealed wounds where to hit you with debilitating force. If this video, this exploration into the depths of the psyche has touched you in some meaningful way, if something profound within you has been awakened or stirred, I invite you now to make a declaration, a commitment to this ongoing process. Right here in the comments, I choose awareness. Let's begin to build a virtual movement, a community of individuals who are no longer content to merely survive by pretending to be strong, but who are committed to living with authentic truth, courage, and conscious awareness. And please don't forget, the next video is also an integral part of this ongoing journey. It is important you need to keep going. Real lasting transformation only truly begins when you refuse to stop at the first challenging step. See you there.